Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode, another wonderful episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. I'm also a couples coach with my partner, also. And this conversation is incredible. I've just finished recording it, so I'm sticking the intro on straight away. It's a really incredible conversation around the topic of man box culture, which is very tightly linked to toxic masculinity, but also around connection and human connection and the antidote to toxic masculinity and to man box culture and relationships and men in relationships and the importance of relationships. There's a lot that we cover in this. Mark Greene is a wonderful, wonderful human being, a wonderful man to speak to. He's fun and playful. And I thoroughly enjoyed speaking to him about this topic. He's incredibly knowledgeable as well. This is going to really, open your mind a bit about how men come to be stoic and emotionless and how they can remedy that. And a lot of the things we talk about, my mind was opened as as Mark was speaking to me, which was great. My mind was opened and realized that, some things clicked into place. And he talks about much of his own experiences as a man and, deconditioning himself from some of the toxic and man box culture type things. And I share some of my experiences that I've seen of men in retreats and how they've really opened up and started to speak and be open and free and enjoy life and be authentic. So this is a tremendous episode to listen to. Just really in awe of these conversations. And I get to have these conversations with men, actually, of all ages, from all over the world. Mark's over in the States. I'm in Portugal from the UK. And just hearing that there's this movement of men who are helping men live more, enjoy life more, be more connected, have better relationships. And actually the key to all of these things is very, very simple and something that, I almost accidentally stumbled upon many years ago, with some of the conversations I was having with, one of my friends in particular, AJ, who used to be on the podcast. But this is a beautiful conversation that I have with Mark. Mark is an author and speaker. He's got multiple books, many of them around. He's got a wonderful book. I haven't read it yet, but I like the sound of it. It's a little Me Too book for men. I think it does what it says on the tin. That one does. But yeah, definitely, strap yourself in for an enjoyable episode. Because this is a really great one for anyone who is a man, a woman, non-binary person, gender non-conforming, who has male friends who they see as being maybe toxic or having to conform to, masculine ideals that maybe they don't want to, or any men who are, not so emotional and feeling, and maybe you see that that's not how they actually want to be. This is a great episode to send to them. So yeah, great episode. Talk about lots and lots of things. And as normally I would be telling you about an event or a workshop or something like that I've got going, and I don't actually have any at the moment. I've got a wonderful group program that I've started to run, and it's really beautiful and enjoyable. And the men that are part of the program have been incredible, and I've seen them open up and share and talk and look happier basically over the course of a couple of weeks. And I was thinking, I'll leave that at that. But it's just been really, the importance of men and relationships we talk about in the episode. So I'm not going to get too much into that. But, my one-to-one coaching is always open. I probably have space for one more person at the moment. If that's something that interests you, if you've listened to the podcast and you're looking for support in some area, dating, relationships, intimacy, wanting to just actually connect more authentically with yourself, with the world, with women, with men, whatever your gender. So yeah, but without further ado, I will let you get into this wonderful episode.
I love that. Leave meeting. Recording in progress. Leave meeting. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me, Mark, today. Obviously I have here Mark Greene. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I've been a keen follower of your work through Instagram, and especially over the last kind of couple of years as things have unfolded around the conversation around men, masculinity, and toxic masculinity in particular, something that I talk about a fair bit myself. But I'm really interested by kind of your take on it, because I see that you don't use the term toxic masculinity very often, which is a question we'll talk about in a bit. But the first question I'd love to get from you, Mark, is how did you come to do the work that you do today?
Well, let me first say thank you for inviting me to come be in a conversation. I'm always honored to be in a conversation with somebody else who's pursuing this masculinity question, because I think it's the question of our generation and of our world at the moment. I don't think I'm overstating the case when I say that if we don't get a handle on sort of this dominance obsessed performance of masculinity that most men are doing, we may not survive as a species. So it would be nice to kind of figure out a healthier way to be men. And that's the core of my work. I began, like many writers of my generation, ranting on Facebook when it hadn't yet overthrown all of our democratic institutions by becoming the main conduit for QAnon lunacy. But my wife said one day, you certainly are writing a lot. Why don't you start a little blog or something? And I was off to the races. And my first persona in the world was as a stay-at-home dad blogger, as talking about this idea that millions of men are actually primary caregivers for their children, and they're completely invisible. And this was about 15 years ago. So at that time, if there was any mention of dads taking care of kids, it was all comedy. It was Mr. Mom, or dads dropping their kids on their heads in the toilet because they didn't know which side was up for a child, and all that sort of stuff. I began writing into that community, and a lot of men who were part of the Dad 2.0 conference movement and all that stuff were starting to sort of unify their voices in an attempt to get major advertisers to stop treating stay-at-home dads like idiots. And that movement created some solidarity among dads who were otherwise very isolated in our work, taking care of our kids, and we would go to the park and take our 5-year-old to the park in the middle of the day, and there'd be 16 moms sitting on one side of the park and us on the other side of the park. And I remember distinctly, I'd be like, "Hey Gus, how are you? Everything okay? Come over here and get a snack," just performing the fact that I wasn't some random guy hanging out at the child's park. And you had to do that kind of stuff back then because the idea of men raising children was totally antithetical to everyone's expectation of men. And once you're in that role and starting to get weird feedback from people, like, when did you get fired from your job? Why are you doing this? Who are you? I personally had always home officed. And so I was a consultant and a designer, and I was making my money while I was doing this with my son. I did it in partnership with my son's mother, and then we got divorced. So for a while, I was doing it on my own with him. I got remarried later, but I've always been the primary go-to in terms of getting Gus up and getting his lunch made and taking him to school and all that. So you get messages about what it means to be a man that comes back at you from the culture, little microaggressions, little messages all the time. And that it didn't take long before I started wondering, what are the larger masculinity questions or issues at play here? And more importantly, if they're coming at me in this way, how are they already coming at my, 4-year-old son, 5-year-old son? He's 17 now. But that journey has been a process of considering the larger stuff in play with masculinity, and I refer to it often as a culture of masculinity, because I think it's really important for us to differentiate between our individual identities as men and the larger culture that taught us what we believe. And for most men, the larger culture of masculinity is invisible. We don't. It was our moms and dads and brothers and sisters and the kids in the neighborhood and coaches and teachers and everything on TV and everything everywhere. So it was so ubiquitous that it's the water we swim in or the air we breathe. And we just think masculinity is my identity. It's just me. When in fact, if we can start to put a little wedge of daylight between our own identities and the larger culture, which taught us how to be men, that little wedge of daylight in that little space right there is where we can start asking questions about, why do I believe what I believe about women? Why do I believe what I believe about people who don't look like me? Why do I believe what I believe about what I need to do in order to be a man? And that's the work. And that's what the work's been for a while now.
That wedge of daylight is like, I see that as a level of kind of self-awareness, like looking at oneself and going, who am I? Why am I this way? Why am I doing these things? And why is the world in this way? And one of the things I see with the term toxic masculinity is, for a lot of men, and even for me, I see like from a kind of physical point of view, I feel when I hear the term, my body kind of goes into a shock, like ready for some sort of attack that might come. And I see this with a lot of men with the term toxic masculinity. They hear the term toxic masculinity and they're like, oh, someone's coming for me. It's like someone's coming for me, because masculinity is me. I am masculine. I'm a man. I'm masculine. So I must be toxic. Whereas I see you talk a lot about man box culture, right? And it's funny because before I got on, I was speaking to my girlfriend, and I said I was recording a podcast. He said, "Oh, who you with?" A guy called Mark Greene, and we're going to talk about man box culture. He said, "What's that?" And I said, I kind of explained it. I'm going to ask you that question in a minute, because you'll explain it much better than me. But she just instantly went, I really like that phrase. That's a much nicer way to put it. Like, it's a much nicer way to talk about it. It just feels lighter. It feels more able to kind of look at it more closely without too much emotional attachment. So for you, what do you see as the kind of tenets and the makeup of man box culture?
Well, when you talk about toxic masculinity, before we move on to man box culture, I'm always attaching the word culture to everything. So if you said a toxic culture of masculinity, I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, so we're focusing on culture. We have to focus on, could we focus on culture? I'd like to talk about culture. Let's talk about culture. How about culture? Because honestly, masculinity as a concept is ever evolving. There's a multiplicity of possible masculinities. I mean, the illusion of man box culture is that there are 7 or 8 rules for being a man, and we all follow those. Not that we should all follow. No, we all do, just period. And the rules of man box culture, I attach the word culture to man box. Originally, a guy named Paul Kibble in the early 1980s in Oakland was doing a project trying to understand why there was so much domestic violence against women in his community. And he ended up at high schools asking boys, what are the rules for being a man? And he got back this sort of narrow, limited set of rules over and over and over and over again. And he conceptualized what he called the act like a man box. And he said, basically, all men are kind of sort of policed into this box by the men around them and by the culture at large. And they have to follow these rules. And the rules are things like, don't show your emotions, always be tough, never show pain, Be a breadwinner, not a caregiver. Be heterosexual, not homosexual. If you're going to have conversations with other men, make it about money or sex or cars, something light. Don't go deep. And that men should be able to have power, be able to demonstrate power over women and girls. And so those are some of the rules to the man box. And generally speaking, those are still expectations that millions and millions of men have in terms of their performance of masculinity. And again, they don't ask themselves, where did I learn those rules? And this is because boys are trained into these expectations about masculinity beginning in infancy. So by the time we're 2 or 3 years old, we've heard hundreds and hundreds of jokes denigrating girls and women. And we're like, oh, that's the way it is. Girls and women are less. But more importantly, I think this man box culture, the idea that these rules are all out there, they represent, I think, what some people would call traditional masculinity, quote unquote, sort of the old way that things have been done, always been done. But the important thing to understand about man box culture is that, except for the two really toxic pieces of what I just described, which is be heterosexual, not homosexual, and have control over women and girls, that stuff's just basically hate speech, hidden in some idea of what masculinity is. But the other stuff, be a breadwinner, not a caregiver, be tough, all that stuff, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. The problem with man box culture isn't that it contains some of those ideas. The problem is it requires that we enforce it on all the men around us. So when we talk about the enforcement of those rules, that's when man box culture comes in. Okay. So we're talking about a culture where men watch, police, bully, harass, microaggress all the other men around us, our closest friends. We do it all the time. The end result is that boys and men begin to hide at a very early age. And Judy Chu talks about this in her book, When Boys Become Boys. She studied a pre-K class. So for 2 years, she watched this cohort of little boys and girls. And she said that already by age 4, boys are hiding their emotional acuity, that is their ability to read and respond to emotional cues. And they're also already taking on these sort of ideas about toughness and stoicism and not, being somewhat indifferent and detached, all of those expectations that masculine culture puts on us. So already at that very early age, man box culture is beginning to police boys into certain behaviors. And the price those boys pay if they fail to do that is they get kicked out of the boys club at a very early age. It's already there, the policing and bullying. And we live our whole lives under that pressure to conform. And so all of us, you, me, every man listening to this, we all started hiding certain aspects, authentic aspects of who we are. And for some of us, it may have been a really big thing we were hiding, like our sexual identity. Some gay men feel the pressure to hide that when they're young. And that's why there's so many stories of coming out. Well, why in God's name would we be coming out if we weren't first forced into the closet, right, in these ways? So the pressure is evident. It's there all the time. And we create versions of ourselves that are narrow, brittle, stereotypical performances of masculinity, where we've hidden so many authentic aspects of ourselves, small and large. Can be sexual identity, it can be the fact that we like comic books, it can be that we're kind to our wives, right? We don't want to tell that at the bar because they're like, oh man, you're so whipped. So there's all these aspects of who we authentically are that we hide when we're around other men. We're anxious all the time that we're not doing it right and someone's going to call us out. If we mess up in the workplace, it could cost us, the next management project, or it could cost us, some aspect of our construction work possibilities or opportunities. It's all happening all the time. So we have to understand that man box culture is the policing of men by men. And it's ultimately designed to create this vertical dominance-based hierarchy of masculinity. And it's also designed to keep us not trusting each other, keep men wary of each other, keep us not trusting each other.
The last part there is like keeping men wary and not trusting each other. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I run like men's groups, so usually 8-week programs for groups of men. And also I also shared was this
as I got older, I found myself in groups of men and didn't really feel like I could really, like I quote unquote fit in with groups of men. You got me in a group of women, I'd feel I can express, I can be. And it's something I see again and again with men, that they come into men's circles, men's groups of men. They're very apprehensive about speaking, they're very apprehensive about being. And it's only once they kind of see that it's safe, they start to express who they are. And it's from what you're saying there, is that we're schooled from a young age to bully each other constantly, whether that starts off in school and then it gets into kind of college, university, and then into the workplace, when actually affects the ability for men to have real, authentic relationships with each other and friendships, because we're always in this state of trying to prove that we're a man, or trying to avoid ridicule, or trying to fit in with the other men, which really suppresses all these very natural tendencies, whether that's sexuality, whether it's expression, whether it's even, down to a man might like to dance, or he might like to play an instrument, or he may like to wear pink. He has to suppress all these things simply so that he can kind of get by without the daily ridicule of other men.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting, you talked about men in men's circles being apprehensive until they figure out it's safe. I struggle with the degree to which language either serves our goal or is problematic for us. So when you talk about toxic masculinity or safe spaces, immediately so many men go, what are you, wimp, safe space, what are you, little coward? All this stuff blows back at us. But I think a really powerful way to think about those safe spaces where men feel free to speak, they exist because the other men in the group are genuinely interested in all that stuff that we've hidden, all those things that make us human, all those things that make us interesting and authentic. And we find common interests and we hear stories that resonate for us. It is hard to get men into circles of men's work. And in my experience, once they're there, they speak. And they speak volumes of deeply meaningful and closely held secrets. And suddenly they realize for the first time in their lives what it's like to be in a room with other men who actually want to hear from you, who actually want to know what's going on for us, right? And in that moment, it's like breathing air for the first time. You feel this weight come off you when you enter a circle of men who actually care. And one of the most fundamental things that shows they care is that they're not here to have you confirm their view of masculinity. They're not here to have you conform to what they expect. Those men in those rooms understand we're all different, understand we all have different histories of trauma and joy and excitement and pain. We have struggles. We have all the stuff that's going on for us. But when you enter a circle of men sharing their stories, it's like going back into that joy we knew as young boys when we had close friends. And I will also mention another author here whose studies are crucially important to verify for us that boys are trained out of friendship. And her name is Niobe Way, and she wrote a book called Deep Secrets. She's a psychologist and a researcher at NYU. And her book, Deep Secrets, she went to boys in early adolescence and asked them a very simple question. She said, what do your best friends mean to you? And these boys said, all of them, and they were from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, different race, different class, different cultures. They all said, I love my best friend. They used the word love unashamedly. And the other thing that they all said was, without my best friend, I would go crazy. Then 4 years later, she goes back and interviews the same boys in late adolescence. And they say, oh, yeah, my friend Mike, he lives around the corner, but I don't see him that much anymore. He's a great basketball player. No homo. They'll throw that in there because they want to make sure that if they compliment any boy, that it's not taken as being some sort of a sexual thing. And then another boy says, yeah, that friendship, it's kind of on a crossfade. It's kind of fading out. And she discovered that every one of those boys had stopped long ago being concerned with communicating their authentic selves, which would have been what created those relationships in early adolescence, the richness of them and earlier. Instead, they're worried about proving they're not little kids, girly, or gay. That's the exact language. So we have a generation of young men who are convinced that these natural capacities for human connection, which create rich, joyful friendships, meaningful friendships, without which they would go crazy, all of these human capacities are somehow determined to be feminine, wrongly. They're just human capacities, but they're defined as feminine and shamed out of boys and men from infancy forward with things like man up, be a man, what are you, a sissy, what are you, a girl, repeating over and over and over again. Anytime any of us show a little too much neediness, a little too much joy, a little too much, whatever that is. So it's important for men to understand that we are trained out of connection, and all of the years of trial and error work that normally would go on to learn how to connect across difference, to express emotions in nuanced ways, to hear the emotions of others without collapsing into them, to hold stories and uncertainty and see what emerges. All of those things naturally get learned unless you block boys from showing their emotions. Once you block them, if that's the rule for being a boy, then they are cut off from the fundamental work that forms real, authentic relationships. We still manage to do it. But finally, we beat these friendships out of boys. And by late adolescence, they're told, yeah, you want to have any kind of emotional connection with anybody, go find a girlfriend. So we dump all of that need on one poor girl. And that's assuming we're heterosexual. We dump all that need on one poor girl. She's in no position to carry that load of lost or disconnection that boys are feeling by then. And by late adolescence, boys' suicide numbers become 4 times that of girls. Wow. So we break their connection in the world, and then we slot them into a dominance-based hierarchy. And we say, hey, guess what? All that stuff that makes you authentic, all the stuff that's creative and new and connecting and beautiful in you, we don't care about any of that. But if you want to hold your position in this hierarchy that we just stuck you in, you need to start dominating all the men around you. And if you fail to do so, you're going to lose status, which means more men will be above you to step on your fingers on the rungs of the ladder to dominate you. And if you fail to dominate enough, or if you break enough of the rules of the man box, you'll be beaten and potentially murdered. So many gay men are murdered simply for being different. So the system is broken top to bottom. And I will tell you this too, David, I'm surprised I got this far in the conversation before I brought race into this, because you can't have a conversation about masculinity and not talk about how it plays out across race, because it plays out very differently for men of color than it plays for white men like me. And it's interesting, masculinity, dominance-based masculinity was created to benefit white men. So we're at the top of this beautiful hierarchy, right? This lovely dominance-based structure. But it's broken. I say it's broken top to bottom because if white men are getting the benefit of this whole hierarchy, if we're at the top above everyone else, then why are we the population that makes up the 75% of all male suicides? Because we're isolated, we're lonely, and because that competitive anxiety never ends. The poster child for man box culture is our previous president, Donald Trump. Yeah. That man was at the top of the hierarchy. And I'm telling you, that's not a happy man. That man is not happy. And he's representative of what happens when you go all in on man box culture, on toxic, on domination-based masculine culture. You can never stop looking over your shoulder for who's coming for you.
And it's interesting, I was listening to Brené Brown's book, as you were talking about suicide there. I was listening to Brené Brown's book, I think Atlas the Heart, and she was talking about, I think the emotions were despair and hopelessness. And she's talking about how when we are hopeless, that we don't believe that tomorrow will be any different from today, and our life is not great, then we have no hope for a better future. But I kind of couple that with what you were saying about how men are almost conditioned into disconnection, into disconnecting from everybody around them.
Punished for trying to connect. That would be the better way to put it. Yeah.
Punished for trying to connect. So we get these armies of men who are in their 20s and 30s as well, who don't really know how to connect. They haven't moved up to the dominance hierarchy. Their lives feel hopeless, right? But they don't have any sort of connection. They don't have any connection in their life. So their life feels hopeless. So living for them is a painful day-to-day experience because they see around them the trappings that other people have of success and dominance, but they also see other people with connection that they don't have. So they feel lonely, they feel isolated, so they feel hopeless, they feel despair, they feel anger. And I think that leads to suicide. It also leads to purposelessness as well, because if you haven't found a vocation that's meaningful. And I guess it leads into, in the UK here, we have a lot of male suicide is, it's very high, as it is in many places in the developing world.
Yeah.
But one of the things I'm also thinking of at this moment is in the States, you guys have the kind of epidemic of mass shootings that occur. And the profile of the men that perform these mass shootings is always so quite consistent, isn't it? They're often socially isolated, they're lone wolves, they don't have any friends, and they're usually angry at the world, and particularly often women.
We can look at masculinity in terms of why it is that older white men commit suicide through the frame of, well, what are the rules of the man box? They're all about doing. You got to make money, you got to have lots of sex, you got to, drink everybody under the table. And it doesn't matter if you did it yesterday. You made money yesterday, great. How much did you make today? You had sex yesterday, how much did you have today? So it's a hamster wheel of constantly re-upping and proving again and again and again that you're meeting those expectations in that particular version of masculinity. And the problem is for young men, and it's kind of a game that we can play, some of us, if we're lucky. Oh yeah, I got to go to college, so I went to college and I got a job and I started making some money. Hey, look at me, I guess I'm doing all right. Oh, I got a mortgage. Okay, well, I got a house, I got a car, I got a wife, I had a kid, and suddenly 3 decades go by and you're sort of doing it. You're not out, abusing women. You're not doing any of this. You're just meeting the expectations, the benchmarks of success. But you realize you're doing this in more or less in a state of isolation. You may be in connection with your partner, maybe not. But if we grow up as young men, constantly knowing that the guys around us are judging us, if we grow up as young men, understanding that we have to kind of police the guys around us in order to hold our position, then these young men you talk about who feel disconnected, who maybe don't even get a chance to climb that little ladder of economic markers, much earlier they run into the dead end wall of this culture. Those of us who get to climb the ladder a little bit may look up when we're 45 and say, well, I'm not able to pick up women at the bar anymore. I'm not able to, I didn't get that raise at work. Oh, I've got a health problem all of a sudden. But sooner or later, we're all going to hit the wall if we live in a culture of masculinity that doesn't let us connect in authentic ways with other men. If we can't have a circle of men in our lives that we can talk about what's really going on for us, and I would suggest to you that most of those young men who are alienated and disconnected and violent and frustrated, who may go for male supremacist frames like being an incel or being an MRA, who may be part of gun culture in the US. These are men I would suggest to you are deeply isolated, and the numbers about American culture and society back that up. Cigna did a study in 2018. They found out that 1 out of every 2 Americans feels sometimes or always alone. And women get caught up in this cycle of isolation too, because if their significant other is disinterested in any kind of social interaction, then they sort of get stuck in that cycle too. So many men say, oh yeah, my wife figures out all our social stuff. I don't do any of that, or I'm friends with the guys at the gym. And if they move to another gym, they just drop all those relationships and just take the next guys at the next gym, because we're all the same. What's the difference anyway? It's all cookie cutter stuff. It's all surface level friendships of proximity for us. Long and short is some of these people are picking up guns. Some of these people are living in deep despair. Some of these people are self-medicating. These are all young men who just need community and connection. And I mean real connection. And when we talk about race and masculinity, if this is all about dominance and all about hierarchies, once you teach a boy over the course of his young life that girls and women are less, it doesn't take much to teach him that people with different skin color are less, people with different religious backgrounds, immigrants, people with different religious faiths. It's a slippery slope into extremism. This is why In the US, male extremists and white supremacists are the same population. They recruit from the same online groups. They recruit from each other's populations, and they weaponize this idea that they're the victims in this whole equation, right? That women aren't interested in me because I'm not a Chad, or that the white race is being erased. And so all of these men carry this constant, ongoing isolation and the anxiety that comes out of being policed every day by the men around them. And I'm pretty sure that when you get into groups like that, the policing is dangerously severe. Which at the same time, what's really weird about it is they're offering community, right? That you join the white supremacists and we'll give you the family you never had. It's all about fixing isolation, but it's done in a way that's actually toxic and will destroy these kids' lives. But long and short of it is, we're looking at a culture of disconnection and isolation for boys and men, which is then being weaponized by extremist groups and pointed at other populations, whether those, this kid who went drove 200 miles to go to a black neighborhood here and shoot up a grocery store. That's the extreme version of the weaponizing of boys and men's isolation. So we got a lot of work to do to create connection for young men and for boys, and it can be done. But we have to start paying attention to that.
And it's I'm definitely going to get on to more of the connection because it's something that I work quite deeply in. What do you say to those who, because I come across a lot of men who say, men are wired different, we're naturally stoic and non-emotional and more aggressive. Like, what do you say to that sort of rhetoric?
Well, I think the problem that we have is that we don't view masculinity as a plural. If we lived in a culture where there was a million possible ways to be a man, a million performances of masculinity, and they were all equally valued, then men who are naturally stoic could find their place on that spectrum. They'd say, this is my preferred way to do it. The problem is we don't do it that way. We say, okay, there's this narrow set of rules and everyone needs to get the hell down the spectrum and get in that box, right? The end result is that boys are raised in a way which is emotionally disconnected for them. So they never get to find out if they're not stoic. There's no process by which they can explore being anything but stoic. So then you have a bunch of men standing around, oh, we're naturally stoic. I say, yeah, you are, because there's a guy behind you with a baseball bat. And if you do anything else, he's going to hit you in the head with it until you get stoic again. Long and short of all of this is, and if I say long and short one more time, just edit that shit out. I don't know what's wrong with my speech patterns today, but seriously, man, we have to start looking at masculinities, a vast range of them. Okay. And we have to start laughing more and giggling more and being more silly and being more playful and being more open in front of young boys so they can see how older men do this, what this looks like, right? There's a guy named, and there's also work to be done in the school. There's a guy named Ashanti Branch here in the US, and he's very well known. He was in the documentary, The Mask You Live In. And he has a whole process about masks with young men. And he hands out pieces of paper. He says, write the things on the front of this. This is your mask. Write the things that you show other people. And on the back, write the things that you don't show people. And these kids write funny or tough or, athletic on the front. And on the back, they're writing things like suicidal or sad or alone. This is not, this is every man's story. And if men don't feel safe enough to question their own disconnection, anxiety, loss, grief, rage, anger, that they're living with this every day and aren't questioning it, then we need to start inviting them to do that. Hey, man, what's going on for you? Where's that all coming from? Is this what you want? Does this feel like life? Is your wife afraid of you? Are your kids afraid of you? Are you still outraged and angry at the way your father treated you growing up? What is going on, man? Open up, tell us. That's the secret to getting to changing this entire culture of gun violence, racism, all of it. It's all tied up in dominance hierarchies. And we can say, man, let's create a masculinity, a more lateral masculinity of connection, Let's create power with other people instead of over them. And let's find out what it's like to be invited back into the human community and have a vast range of people that we're close friends with who don't look like us, don't sound like us, aren't the same gender, aren't the same race. Let's get the human family, get the richness of that back in our lives. And I guarantee that anxiety will dissipate.
It's like allowing men to embrace diversity, both internally and externally in other people, right? So that instead of having this very narrow band of what masculinity is, we start to accept like, oh, this guy over here, he dyes his hair pink. Like, that's also totally masculine thing to do. And we start educating the older men, start showing this to younger men as an accepting, or younger men or younger children as an acceptable way to express your masculinity. And young boys grow up going, oh yeah, that's also masculine. And oh yeah, the guy who, he's a ballet dancer, that's also masculine, and that's okay. Because then it allows men not to worry about the baseball bat behind them, but in fact start to put their attention on how do I want to express myself into the world.
Mm-hmm. You know who we have the hardest time accepting?
Who?
The version of masculinity that we have the toughest time accepting is the part that we hid in ourselves. Mm-hmm. So if you have a what might be described as a effeminate side that you've hidden for years, you might see that in another man and get really mad. Like, no, if I hit it, then you got to hide it. You know, there's this defensive, reactive layers of stuff. It's like an onion that needs to be peeled for us, right? Until we finally get to that place where we forgive ourselves for not actually fitting in the man box. That actually was never a good fit for me. And I fought for, in my own life, personally, Mark Greene, 50 years I spent trying to do that. I was a fairly liberal guy. I had ideas about being a nice person. But Lord have mercy, I never showed parts of myself ever. And ultimately, I had a victimhood complex. I went to a thing called the Mankind Project here in the US, and it's a men's work, weekend group thing. And I got out on the carpet on my weekend, my moment to tell the truth. And I said to this group of men, I said, because of who I grew up with and how my life was when I was a kid, I don't trust men. I don't like men. I hate men. And I'm sick to death of being alone. And that moment of being honest with myself and with them, and they looked at me and they said, well, you want to try trusting us? And I was like, why not? What else do I have to lose at this point, this late date in my life when I spent 50 years hiding who I am and really tracking threats all the time, constantly threat tracking. Guy with a new car, beautiful wife, house, mortgage, great job, tracking threats all the fucking time. So we can decide to live a life of connection where we forgive ourselves for what we've hidden and bring it out into the world and say, okay, guess what? This is me. This is who I am. This is who I am. I'm not. And suddenly what comes along with that is this huge gift. Because when we spend, and most men are doing this, you're a computer, you got a certain amount of RAM, right? A little bit of, and if that's all being eaten up, constantly tracking the threats in the room and trying to triangulate on all the other men and figure out the answer that will suit the most of them, try to figure out what to hide, try to figure out what to deny about yourself, all that stuff. You don't really have a lot of time to figure out what you actually think, what you actually believe, who you really are. So when you finally say, fuck the man box, I'm done. I am fucking done with these rules. I'm done with these guys telling me how to live. Fuck all of that. The thing that comes up after that is your honest, authentic voice starts showing up. And you're like, no, I don't have to run my answer through the frickin' man box committee anymore. I don't need to run it through dominance masculinity. I don't need to figure out whether Frank over there is going to take issue with me, because quite honestly, I don't agree with Frank. So I don't need him to agree with what I'm about to say next. I need to speak my truth. And in that moment, you gain access to your authentic voice. You don't feel like you're standing next to yourself, watching yourself do stuff or be in the world. And you also begin to really understand where your boundaries are, what you need from other men. You start to select men in your life who are doing the work too. And you inspire men around you to do it. They suddenly go, what happened to him? He was so invisible, and now he's present in the room. This guy actually has the power in the room. How did he do that? I want some of that, right? So I just wish men would take a moment and say, I got all this stuff I really want to bring into the world. I have so many things that I've hidden for so long. And then come join one of our groups, one of these organizations, find a therapist, get a book, listen to more podcasts, whatever you need to do to get there. And I give men, women, non-binary people, I give them a very simple piece of guidance. Look at any interaction, message, whether it's online, whether it's in your personal life, wherever it is, and ask yourself one simple question. Is the person presenting that to you trying to create power over others or power with others? And if you can see that they're trying to create power over someone else with what they're doing in that moment, then that's your moral, true north. You can say, no, that's not for me. I want to cooperate, collaborate, co-create. I want to create something emergent in the relationships in my life and see what that becomes. Not that I tell everybody what to do, that we collectively come to understand what's best. All of that's out there. It's waiting for us, but we got to get out. We got to break out of the box. We got to say, no, I don't want Frank running my life anymore. Frank's an idiot.
Yeah, and you put it so, it's like, as you were explaining that there, how you create the space, and it creates space in a man's mind. And I was recently on a 5-day men's retreat facilitating on, and I was trying to explain to someone afterwards, like, what's the benefit for men? And I kept saying, like, men that were there, you would see them walk in on the first day and they were stiff. Their faces didn't move. They didn't really speak. But by the time you got to like the last day, they looked loose, they looked relaxed, they looked at ease, they spoke more fluidly. And they were like, okay, I understand that. But what you've just said there is like put it all into place in my head. It's like they're suddenly in a space where there's no men who are trying to dominate them at all. There's no dominating at all happening there. It's a space that is free for expression, free to be yourself, free to tell your story in whatever way you want, where people will listen to you. And if you don't want to tell your story, people will also be totally fine with that as well.
Yeah.
A space where men can get out of their heads and they can move, and they do some yoga and they do some breath and they get into their bodies, and they can be playful as well. They can be playful. And the facilitators are modeling all of these behaviors together and alone. They're opening up, they're sharing, they're being playful, they're having fun. And the men suddenly realize that this space they're in may have been the first time in their lives since they were like maybe 4 or 5 years old, where they could just be and allow for the thoughts of concern and worry about how other men are going to be, any fears, any threat tracking, that can all die down. And what starts to emerge, as you said, was this more authentic expression of them that may haven't seen the light of day for 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And in that moment, their whole body relaxes because it's in a state of like,
you're not running the calculation on what to hide. You stop running it.
Yeah.
What also there's, and I know you've run into this in the work that you do. We often talk to men about, hey, and I had this in spades, by the way. You got a young boy down there somewhere inside, and he made some tough choices to survive when you were little, and that kid's still running the show. And it's time to go down there and find him and tell him, I wish I could have been here before, but I'm here now, and you're going to be okay. Now you come and they talk about reintegrating that angry or upset or scared human being back into who you are and letting go of the behaviors that he created to protect himself that are no longer serving us as very well as men. But that I used to, for years, I would say, yeah, I should probably do some work on that thing that I always feel in my gut, because we talk to men about, hey, where this emotion you're feeling, where's it in your body, right? You were talking about body work. And for me, it was like a stone in my gut, but I also called it the thing in the dungeon, right down below in the cellar. And every few years I would go down those stairs, and I'd say, okay, I'm gonna go down there and do that work. I'm gonna figure that out. Because I feel it all the time. It's part of the anxiety engine in me. But I go down there and the chains start rattling and something's in there and I don't want to face it. So I come back up the fucking stairs. I'm like, nope, that's not this year. When I finally did it, did that thing, what welled up in me was such a sense of shame and grief and self-disgust that I didn't know what to do with the sensations, right? That's why we go back up the stairs. That's why we don't deal with it, because it's terrifying. It blows all out of scale. It's this frightened, terrified, pissed off little 5-year-old, but he has become a monster. And if we don't get down there and deal with that stuff, it runs our lives. In my case, I did some work with the Mankind Project. And one of the things that happened for me is they have a thing. I think it's okay for me to share that they have a sweat lodge, which is one of the things that they did toward the end of the process. And I had always had this visual of a thing in the basement, but I also had this stone, this black stone that was so big that I couldn't figure out how to get at it, right? It just sat in my gut. And I go into this sweat lodge and I'm thinking about all the stuff that went on over the course of the weekend and what I sort of faced in terms of my own issues, this 5-year-old, all that stuff. And I'm looking into this, and the sweat lodge, you heat stones up red hot, you put them inside the room, you pour water over them, herbed water, and create steam, and that's the sweat lodge. And I'm looking at this rock and I'm thinking, man, I think I got a handle on this. I think I can get at it now. And this rock just goes pop and breaks in half right in front of me. Red hot, glowing in the dark rock just goes pink and breaks in half. And I'm like, okay, then. Okay. And now I've got 2 smaller pieces and I can start that work, right? But we have so much shame and grief about that little kid who got worked over, who's still down there raising hell. And I invite men to consider the possibility that you can bring him back in, you can take care of him, you can make him safe and reintegrate him into your whole self.
You can give him the space to express all the things that he didn't get to express, say the things he wants to say, and actually bring that suppressed playfulness, that suppressed emotion back into your life and use that to fuel you to go forward. Is something I say a lot to men, is that these emotions you've been suppressing, you don't realize that they're actually, it's like holding, a big backpack of rocks. They're actually slowing you down from propelling you in your life and the things you're interested in doing, whether it's, having a better marriage, having a better relationship with your children, or even in your career. Holding on to that suppressed anger and other emotions and not bringing your authentic self out is actually holding you back from the things that you feel that you really want in this moment.
Can you imagine? I mean, for me, I attribute a lot of the change in my life to raising my son. But there are men to this day whose, 4-year-old child, he's got the blocks out on the floor. He's doing a racetrack. He's making the rrr sounds, and they're sitting in their chair because they can't imagine getting down on the floor with him, even though they want to. They're like, oh, I'd like to build part of that racetrack. They can't do it because man box culture and all the policing that's gone in their lives, they don't even need the other men there anymore. They've internalized all that policing and they're doing it to themselves. Oh no, I can't get down on the floor. What would the guys say? What would these rules say about doing something like that? So for me, I was lucky that my kid was having so much damn fun that I just like, well, fuck it, I'm going down there too. And I spent a lot of time playing stuff that I hadn't been allowed to play with. The sandbox in the backyard, we built some stuff out there. We built volcanoes with tunnels through them, and we put the tank over here and it's a defensive position. Wow, cool. And I never once thought, well, I'm doing this for my son to help develop his sandbox skills. I was there having a great time with him. And we can play with other men in exactly that same way. We can say, it is great to see you. I'm so glad I know you. I feel lighthearted when I'm around men who I have this understanding with, that it's okay to be who I am. I feel lighthearted around myself when I realize I have this understanding with me. So remember, everything we're talking about doing with other men, it's a mirror to what we have to do internally. We have to be okay with who we are. We have to let that playful self out and say, I'm only, for those of us who believe this, I'm only here for one lifetime. And man box culture stole it from me for 30, 40, 50 years, but I'm taking it now. And if some guy is going to make fun of my socks, let him. I don't care. I really don't care. My socks are yellow. Yeah, you spotted that. Good for you. You're the guy, aren't you? Okay. And sometimes they're like, what's going on with him? You know, makes us curious about how we can be free.
Yeah. I can think of environments I've walked into in the last few years where this man box culture is very strong in the men that are there, and I walk in, and maybe I have some floral shirt on, or I'm wearing something that's non-conformist, and instantly a man says something to me about my outfit, and I just go, "Yeah, man, I like it." and they kind of look, and they're like, "Wait, you haven't stepped into I've refused to enter the game." And they look dumbfounded, and I'm like, "Yeah, man, I like it. Like, I got it here," and I just don't entertain it. And they're left with this almost like, well, okay, I don't know what to say next, or maybe they say something else, and I'm still like, okay, man, like this is, and I might even just walk away at that point and be like, look, you're just one of those guys, and I'll leave you to it. But they really feel, it almost shocks them, because it's like, someone doesn't do this, this person doesn't do this, and they're like, what? And I've had them come back over to me later, start talking to me like, so what do you do? What do you do for a living? What do you do for work? What do you do for yourself? Like, and they start talking to me, and I start sharing openly. And then they start talking to me, and they're telling me things about their lives, and they're like, oh, but don't tell any of these guys here this stuff, because they won't understand. And I often say, have you ever tried to?
Yeah, they might understand. You'd be surprised. That's an interesting point you're raising, David, because that's the one of the things about man box is that it is ultimately silencing, right? The rules of masculinity, dominance-based masculinity, is about silencing us. So we're with 6 or 8 other guys, and we just assume they all agree with all of this because they're not talking either. But when we talk, when that guy that comes over to you and goes, "No, don't tell the other guys," it's like, once we open up the conversation, a lot of people start saying, "Yeah, I think this is kind of stupid too." And your description of having a certain shirt on and the guy coming up and doing the standard challenge on it, and you being like, okay, well, cool, I'm gonna go get a beer. That's an act of love. When we don't panic, when we don't react, when we don't run the math on who's the guys in the room and am I going to get approval by what I say next? Do I have to get dominant with this guy now? When we don't run any of that, when we just say, "Hey, brother, go get a beer now. Love you. Love this. I love my life. It's good." That vibe is transformational. And I see it time and time again. I'm on a Zoom call with you right now, David. That's all I have, just a Zoom call. But you have this benevolence about you, this kindness, this comfort in your own self and in your own body, just the way you're presenting. Now, either you're really good at faking it, or you're just another guy who's like, I'm okay with me. I'm okay and I want to help other men find this same level of comfort, peacefulness, whatever it is. And that's all about, track the dominance gestures and don't endorse them. Don't engage them. Don't just say that I'm not doing the dominance dance. I don't want to do that. I don't want that.
And I want to touch on relationships a little bit, because the work that I do is with men around dating and relationships, and we touched on how men are bullied, harassed into dropping all the learnings around connection, creating connection.
Yeah.
And this really hampers their ability to create happy and healthy, both romantic and sexual relationships as well.
My boyfriend never talks. He never talks about anything. Never talks about his feelings, all that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's born out of that. We're trained out of learning how to do it. It's not like we don't want to do it. We also don't know how.
Yeah.
So if you're, a kid's 4 or 5 years old, and he's out on the playground, he scrapes his knee, starts crying. His dad's looking around the playground. Oh boy, hey, man up. It's okay. Don't cry. You're all right. Shake it off. And if he goes a little further, maybe one of the kids in the playground says, "What are you, a girl? What are you, a sissy?" That whole cycle. And emotions aren't, we talk about crying, but emotions are every single possible emotion. So emotions are born in the back and forth of relating, right? I don't have an emotion, put it on a plate and hand it to you. What you and I talk about over the course of, it's called relating, which is expression, words, nuance, tone, context, all of these things inform a conversation in these moment by moment back and forth. So I may start out talking to you feeling a little uncertain, like I don't know where this conversation is going to go. Then we have a little more conversation and I start to get kind of annoyed because you're talking about something that I don't agree with, but I don't want to say anything. And then we either start to butt heads, and out of that is born anger or frustration, or we bridge over that and we find some other understanding. We explain it back, and then we start feeling some joy or connection. That process of creating emotions they are co-created. They are created in the process of relating. And when we tell a boy, don't show your emotions, we cut him off from what gets co-created with someone else in a relationship. So instead, men do relationships in the only way that's left, which is transactional. I'll give you a nice dinner if you'll give me your time and affection. Or on a larger scale, I'll marry you. I'll pay the mortgage. We'll get a car. I'll do this. You need to satisfy my sexual needs because that's the transaction. And I don't know any other way to do it. I don't understand my own intrinsic value, why I deserve intimacy or why I deserve sex or why I deserve any of that stuff. So I'm going to be transactional about it. Here's the money. Here's the success. Here's me performing dominance. Here's me doing the man box really well. That's my woman. Don't touch her. All that transactional idea. If we don't do relationships, if we don't create connection in the back and forth of relating, if that's broken for us and we're never given a chance to learn it, then all that's left for us is the transactional stuff. And that's why sex is so difficult for us, because we're like, hey, it's been 10 days. I think I'm owed some sex here, instead of the completely different kind of healthy relationship where intimacy is woven through it day by day over the course of time, rises and falls, sometimes leads to sex, but often is there in other ways because it's being co-created in the back and forth of relating. We see each other. I see my partner, whether that's a man or a woman or a non-binary person. I see them daily. We take joy in each other's company because we're co-creating the relationship. And we're changing over time, but we're tracking those changes in each other and we're celebrating them. We're like, yeah, we're older now. We're smarter now. We've changed this. You're going off in that direction in your life. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to walk with you and see these changes. We're going to keep relating and talking, and emotions are going to continue to emerge out of that for us. But the joy of connection is there. It's not a transaction. Transactional relationship. If you look at incels and the way they talk about women, they are performing that shit 24/7. This woman won't be with me because she doesn't think I make enough money or I'm attractive enough. They're tracking everything as a transaction because they got taught that that's what it means to be a young man. And they got taught that they don't have what it takes. You don't have what it takes for the transaction, by the way, when in fact their human side would create a very different outcome for them.
They'd create this wonderful dance of emotion and connection that would mean that those transactional things start to matter a lot less.
Yeah. And what I have with you right now on the internet, we've never met before. We're talking now. I feel that in the back and forth of relating with you, I feel like, well, David, if you're ever in town, get over to the house. We're going to have dinner. We're going to hang out. This good feeling is not any different than what we can create with any woman we know. The idea that she's a woman and therefore sex is possible, which means that relationship is totally different than the relationship I'm having with my male friends. Whoa, everybody, slow way the fuck down. We can just have the joy of connection with our partners, with women that we're not partnered with with people that, I mean, with the guy at the corner store.
Mm.
Human connection is beautiful. And once we're open to it, we find that we have a network of dozens or even 100 people that we get this joy from. And we stop looking at our one relationship with a woman as being the source of so much that she can never fulfill. And so, you know, and then on top of that, we're doing transactions. Here's my credit card for love. Love me now. I'm ready to make my payment. You know, it's crazy. And I love men, and I want men to understand that you've got the ability to learn these relational capacities. It doesn't take that long.
Mm.
It doesn't take that long, because a lot of these things we did when we were little boys, we did it naturally in these childhood friendships. You know, we co-created and collaborated and improvised, and we didn't judge each other. And we, you know, a box became a boat, became a car, became a submarine, became a spaceship. We were able to improvise and play in really fluid, dynamic ways. You know how to do this. You got trained out of it. You can train yourself back into this idea. And I recommend you start by doing it with other men, because you take that sexual piece out, which is helpful unless you're gay, and then it's in there, and that's okay too. But if you start this work with men in a men's circle, you can rediscover the joy of connection that you had as a little kid with your friends. We all remember it. This is why men grieve so much. That was there, and it was beautiful, and it was rich. And my friend, when I was 12, and it just went away. Where did it all go? Where's my friend? Where are my friendships? So you can rediscover it. You can that's the first thing I discovered in men's work. I got guys I love now. I'm like, damn, how are you? Good to see you. We can get all that back. That circle of friends will inform your personal relationships, your romantic relationships, because all the pressure will come off that. You're like, hey, guess what? I also get connection, love, and meaning from this larger circle of friends, of men, whatever it is. And then you can start to see that same joy in your partner that you see in these men, and you go, oh, that's the universal human part of this. That's the part that I don't have to, like, it's not transactional at all. And out of that is born intimacy and understanding and growth. Intimacy is born out of connection. It's not born out of transactions. Boy, I'm full of it, aren't I?
Yeah, that was beautiful. Though. It's really, because
I'm just like, you know what? I got to say this stuff because I don't think enough men hear it, and I just want to get it said. And I'm sorry if I'm just like going here. You know, it's like, David, you talk, you share something, for God's sake, man.
But no, it's so beautiful, and I can't agree more. Is that this intimacy that a lot of men continually seek in women, right? If that's their desired sex, and that's the experience I have with my work, is men, they're like, I'm craving intimacy, I'm craving intimacy. Mm-hmm. The first stage is they think they're craving sex. They're like, I want sex, because it's the closest thing, it's the only thing that the man box says that a man can have that looks a bit like intimacy, that feels like it. So they crave sex, they crave sex. And maybe some men, they go and get it, and they do get it. Or some men get a lot of it, and they still realize they feel the emptiness of not having something. And then they're stuck because, and this was probably me at one point in my 20s, I was stuck. I was like, I don't know. I can have lots of sex. I can have sex 4, 5, 6 times a week with maybe 3 or 4 different women, but I still feel this emptiness. Like, what is that thing that's missing? And what I started to see what it was it was actual intimacy. It's like feeling other people, feeling women at that time, because that was what I was used to. And as I got older and more, I started to be like, I can have intimacy with other men. And that can include things like a hug. That can include like an arm around the shoulder. That can include, dude, I'm feeling really sad and upset. Like, this thing happened in my life, or I'm struggling. And this level of intimacy fed into the intimacy that I created in relationships, become quite cyclical. That it's like, I'm hanging out with guys and we're having like some really great times. And some of those great times are just sitting on a beach somewhere with a couple of bottles of water, talking about our lives, or, you know, some of them it's a few bottles of beer, but through creating more intimacy with them, which created more intimacy I had even with myself, because understanding my own feelings and wants and desires enabled an increased intimacy in my romantic relationships. So it's this human connection piece of that, how human connection is so nourishing, right? But actually it spreads. You can't just kind of go, okay, I'm going to create intimacy with my desired sex, whether that's, you know, men, women, or non-binary people, and ignore intimacy with everyone else, because actually you won't have the tools to do that in the way that you really, really want to, and really your soul desires for you to do so.
Yeah, we're in a network, or you can think of it as a web, and every human relationship is a node on that web. And when we go spend time with someone, we elevate that node, but it's still connected to all those other relationships, right? So in that moment, we're with our friend or with our friends, or we're with our lover, or we're with our father or mother or family member or someone in the community. It's a node, but it's connected to all the other ones. And if you try to break that node loose from the network and hold it over here and have a relationship with it, you have not only robbed yourself of that whole network, you've robbed that node of it, that person, that entity. There's a deep sense of isolation when you are not informed by a larger network of friendships. And that network is spontaneously comes into being for us when we get in touch with our authentic selves, when we start to be who we actually are, instead of trying to model dominance around all the men around us and all, trying to control everything and doing all that. That web is there. The capacities to do relational connection are there. We know them from childhood. The web of relationships are there. It can be atrophied, broken, messed up, but it's still there. And when we begin to center relationships over roles and status and gender and race and all that shit, when we instead center relationships, I'm going to care for this relationship in this moment. I'm not just going to think about me and them. I'm going to think about us. Who's caring about us? This thing, this relationship, that's a third entity. I'm going to start caring for that. I'm going to listen with curiosity. I'm going to hold my emotions and not just dump them. I'm going to consider the stories of other people. I'm going to reframe the ideas I have. I'm going to do all these things that operate in that relational space. I'm going to care for the relationship. Suddenly, all the other relationships start to light up from that process, because we don't do it with one person. Even if I'm just talking to you, I'm impacting the other relationships in my life, because later I may be with someone else and say, oh yeah, I was talking that thing with David and I want to bring that here now. And so the web, the network, all of this being human is out there for us. We just have to stop assuming that we're in competition with everybody, that we have to dominate. When you dominate someone, you can't be in a relationship with someone who's dominating you or who you are dominating. It's not possible. There is no way that can operate as a healthy relationship. It's not possible. So we need to see how much beautiful connection is right there waiting for us. All we have to do is step out of these narrow ideas, bring our full selves, and connect.
Amen. Amen. I think it's incredible and beautiful that the kind of antidote to the man box culture is just authenticity. It's just simply authentic expression and connection. Like it's simple, but not necessarily easy in this world we live in. But actually, and this is the antidote to so many of people's problems, right? There's so many things, and it's just so. I think it's just it's amazing that we kind of come to this, because this is something that I feel really deeply about men, but even with women, is this authenticity that we can share with each other. That is an absolute gift to each other, but it's also an incredible gift to give to the world. Often we talked about this a little bit. It's like we hide our authenticity because we think, oh, it's not wanted. But actually, our authenticity is like, I say this to men a lot. It's like your authenticity is a gift to the world. If you look at your authentic expression as a gift to the world, or a gift to the person you're speaking to, does that change how you think about being authentic? And almost 100% of the time, the men I work with are like, well, yeah, if I know it's a gift, then I want to give that gift, because I'm a good man. I want to be a good man. I want to give people gifts. It's like, well, that's what it is. It's a gift to yourself. It's a gift to other people. It's a gift to the world to bring your authentic self to the table.
It lights up your part of the network of relationships. There may be people 2 or 3 steps removed from you. You give warmth, that improves the experience of the person right there. They then impact someone else, then they impact someone else. When we bring that warmth of being fully present and bringing our whole selves, we light up that part of the net. And when someone else does it 3 or 4 relationships away, we feel that warmth. Someone close to us has a little bit more lightness and joy in them. We're all part of the human family. And the degree to which dominance-based, traumatized, rageful human beings have convinced us all that this hierarchy is the only way to operate and that they will come for us if we don't follow the rules. They've convinced us of that when we were very small. The degree to which those folks are in opposition to what you and I are talking about, they're able to pull it off because so many of us are silent and afraid and isolated and stuck in a transactional way of operating. Well, if I get enough money, my kids will be safe. If I make enough, cash, my wife will love me. All of those things that we want, which are human connection, but we're getting the brittle transactional versions of them. You gotta let go of it, man. Because, honestly, shit's hitting the fan all over the place in every possible way, whether it's climate change, mass shootings, whether it's more authoritarian government showing up everywhere. In the US, I may 4 years, we may not be voting here anymore because the hardcore authoritarian voices in the US are making their move. And I think because they know that they're running out of time. Younger generation, younger men, younger women have a very different view of gender, of race, of a lot of stuff. It's shifting. It's moving in a good direction. But unfortunately, those people who the war in Ukraine, everything, the aggressive, domination-based, hierarchical, masculine forces are on the move, and they're trying to make their power play now. And we can't sit on the sidelines anymore and go, well, I'm looking after my kids. I'm not speaking up here. I'm not going to challenge that guy at the office when he's picking on some woman because I don't want to be his next target, all that stuff. It's time for us to stand up, bring our whole selves, and create a world where that network of relationships is lighting up all over the place and people are feeling okay. And I think a lot of folks who are in that dominance hierarchy will be like, look, that party over there looks a lot better, and I never wanted to be here in the first place. I'm out of here, and pretty soon you'll have a fairly limited number of men who are still addicted to that dynamic.
Yes.
I hope, anyway. This is the bet. I'm putting all my chips on the table. Fuck it, here, all of them. That's my bet.
Yeah. And that gives every man has a part to play. Every man can do something.
Absolutely. We all can bring an authentic version of ourselves wherever on that spectrum of masculinities we want to choose as our place and move up and down it during the day, code switch, do whatever the hell you want. It's freedom. Find the place that fits for you and then bring your gifts into the world. Bring your light up your part of the net. This is our responsibility. You want to talk about men as protectors? This is it. Protect the relationships that you are creating. Protect the people around you. Grant people your full selves. Bring your full gift, and you will make a better world, and you will protect everyone in that moment.
Wow. I'm just going to sit in silence for a moment because that is a really, really powerful piece of message that we can all take on. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
I feel we could sit and probably talk for 4 to 5 hours on this, and we'd enjoy it every moment of it. But yeah, that piece there is just like, it's all our responsibility. If we want to protect, we protect people's right to be authentic, to be their authentic selves. That is, it's almost like that is in this modern time, that is the war for men, is to protect people's right to be their authentic self in the world.
Yeah, I would consider that that's an army I'd join.
I would too, and I've never thought I was one for war.
Well, it's a huge pleasure meeting you, David, and I know we'll cross paths again in the future. I know it. So
Definitely. Where can the listeners find you, learn more about you, read your books?
Well, if you can find me on most social media as Remaking Manhood. So I'm on Twitter at Remaking Manhood, Instagram at Remaking Manhood. I have a website, remakingmanhood.com. For those who are interested in that sort of thing, I do a lot of consulting to organizations around diversity, equity, and inclusion through a masculinity frame, but also just in terms of the general work that needs to happen. And I have a podcast. It's called Remaking Manhood, the Healthy Masculinity Podcast, which I co-host with Charles Mathis. And we've got a lot of great conversations there. If you go to Twitter at Remaking Manhood, you'll see it. There's a link in my bio that goes to all this other stuff. Same thing with my Instagram bio. So you can get to all my stuff, but the podcast is fun. I have several books. I have the little Me Too book for men. It's about 75 pages. It talks about all the stuff I spoke about in this podcast, the whole construct of domination-based masculinity and man box culture. 75 pages long. You can read it in 2 hours. It gives men a sense, a handle on that larger culture that's just otherwise invisible to us. And then I have Remaking Manhood, and I have a book I co-authored with my partner, Dr. Salih Ababa, which is called The Relational Book for Parenting. And it has a lot of that relational stuff in it, how to raise boys and girls, non-binary kids, in a way which keeps their authentic voices alive until they get past the tipping point and they're not interested in the gender binary anymore, or any of those man box rules for how to be a man, or any of that stuff. So that's my stuff. All my stuff is out there. Come get my stuff. I don't want it anymore. You can take it off my hands. Get my stuff.
Go get it.
Somebody come get my stuff, please.
Oh, Mark, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for such a wonderful conversation.
All right. Until we meet again.
Yes. And listeners, if you've listened to this and you've learned something, which I'm really sure your listeners have learned something from this, feel free to get in contact with me or Mark, just say what it is. And I don't often say this with podcasters, like, share this with somebody, share this with a man, share this podcast with a man who is in some way conforming to the man box culture because he feels he has to. Just share it with him and say, hey, have a listen to this. Don't even ask him to tell you what he thinks afterwards, but just let him listen to this so that he sees there's another way, that there's another option in how he can be and how he can move forward in his life. So until next week, listeners, I'll say ciao, ciao.